In this age of digital and digital transformation, the role of the CIO is changing and is becoming even more important. And today we're speaking with the CIO of Logitech, who really exemplifies this innovative digital CIO. I'm Michael Krigsman. I'm an industry analyst and the host of CXOTalk. I want to say a huge and heartfelt thank you to IPsoft. We are in their AI Experience Lab, and IPsoft is helping make CXOTalk possible. Massimo Rapparini is the CIO of Logitech, and Massimo, welcome.
Thanks for having me again, Michael. Nice to see you.
It's good to see you too. So Massimo, tell us about Logitech.
Well, Logitech, I think everybody probably knows, is the PC peripherals company. We've been in this business over 35 years, and the products that you're probably familiar with are mice, keyboards, webcams, speakers, headsets, and those kind of things. But in the last 5 to 6 years, we've actually expanded into other products that really connect people to the digital experiences that they care about. So that sounds pretty fancy, but what does it really mean? As an example, we make mobile music possible for people, so you can actually listen to music through our Bluetooth speakers. We've video-enabled huddle rooms and video conference rooms in different businesses, but we're also creating and crafting the sporting products that eSports and gamers actually use these days across the globe. So, much richer portfolio than we were maybe like 10 years ago. And we're about a $2.5 billion business. We're in over 30 countries. I think there's some interesting stats in terms of the sheer volume of the stuff that we do. We have about 30 million products that we ship pretty much every month to 100 different countries. We're about 7,000 employees across the globe, so a very global company.
So what do you do as CIO? What do you do as CIO?
Sounds fancy, but what does a CIO actually do? Well, actually, so I'm responsible for about 200 IT professionals across the globe, and really what I've been tasked with is enabling business growth, which sounds also pretty fancy, but it's really about how do we actually implement a technology strategy that helps Logitech achieve its business goals and its growth trajectory. In terms of the strategy and the focus, a lot of things that we do are around the digital, cloud, machine learning, AI, but also more and more cybersecurity, of course. So there's pretty much every business function that I touch across Logitech, and we'll talk a little bit more, I'm sure, about some of the examples of initiatives that we do.
You mentioned innovation.
Yeah.
And I think historically there's been this tension between the CIO being responsible for efficiency,
right,
and this distinction relative to innovation. So maybe you can talk about that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think that's always still been, and I think it's still a bit the image of the CIO as the efficiency driver, right, the operational engine of the company. But realistically, if you look at technology, it's more and more become accessible, more pervasive. And I think it's transitioned the role of the CIO into also focusing on customer-facing type of things, right? And technology implementations that actually help more the front office part of a business, and in our case, Logitech as well. So I think, that let's say, tension between efficiency and innovation is still going to be there. I don't think it's transitioning from, just purely doing innovation. But realistically, it's now a dual role, and you need to balance the two. If I look at what we've done at Logitech, I think Logitech on purpose, we've embraced a method of working such that we actually try to eliminate waste from the system, so where we can be efficient, implement operational efficiencies and be operationally excellent, while at the same time reaping the benefits of those savings and applying them to innovate and create new products, as an example, or deliver better experiences for our customers.
How do you merge that innovation side with the operational efficiency?
Well, yeah, it's for a CIO, I think it's become almost a must, right? It's not really an option. And I think it's an expectation equally within Logitech, as an example, from my business peers, that I'm not just talking tech stuff, that I'm not just focusing on how do I cut costs from the system, but truly how do I help them implement the technology that really drives the things that they're trying to achieve. So if you're in sales and marketing, you're trying to deploy platforms that allow us to actually work with our partners to deploy more products or sell more in different markets, or if you're an engineering team, you're trying to utilize cloud to actually develop new products, right? So those are all things that are expected, and I think it's a matter of, like I said, balancing one with the other, but also trying to really keep pace with the pace of everybody else in the company.
And how is this different from the CIO role historically?
Well, I think what's different is, like I said, the actual pervasiveness of the technology, right? And the way technology has now become something that is not just for the geeks back in the back office of the company. If you look at mobile, if you look at personalizations, if you look at the increase of online e-commerce and things like that, it's become something you and me in our daily lives really have to deal with every day and are seeing increasingly part of how we actually do or buy or do things together, right? And so I think that has changed the application of technology and has required the CIO to not just be focused on how do I keep the trains running, so to speak. I think what's been also important in terms of a change is the fact that now other groups are really more savvy about technology because it's much more accessible. You don't need to be an expert to implement a new or integrate a new e-commerce platform. So now it's much more of a peer-to-peer kind of dialogue versus an expert and an amateur, so to speak.
This pervasiveness of technology, does it create a challenge or an opportunity for you as CIO?
I think it's becoming more and more an opportunity. I think it's an exciting time to be a CIO. I think being cornered into you're just the operations guy, you're just the techie person that makes sure the Wi-Fi works, is not really that compelling or exciting for anybody in the long term, right? So I think it's an opportunity, and the opportunity really translates into multiple ways that you can actually contribute directly to the business. As an example, Logitech, whether it's the innovation of new products, it's the creating better experiences for our customers, it's actually improving the performance of our company altogether. All of these are new areas where, as a CIO, I'm asked to contribute directly. And I think that's, like I said, more and more of an opportunity. Obviously, it's requiring somebody to not be faint at heart and be actually excited about contributing at a faster pace. But I think it's all positive in terms of the importance and the relevance of the IT role.
So the speed aspect is very important as well.
Completely, and I think that's really reflecting the clock speed of not only the organization and the business that we're in, but the industry, right? And you probably heard of Jeffrey Moore, the author of the Crossing the Chasm book. He recently published a new book called Zone to Win. And it's interesting there, he talks about how these S-curves of innovation are increasingly happening faster and faster, right? And that's just an observation. And what's the impact of that is really that organizations and companies are more and more needing to adapt and respond to disruption at a faster and faster pace. Well, that pace means it's something that applies across the board, right? You can't, as an IT guy, opt out and say, I'll keep going at the pace I used to go 20 years ago. And so I think it's a realization of that, and it's really reflecting the way not just Logitech, but a lot of the companies in this industry need to work at. But it's also then, like I said, an opportunity really to make technology more relevant.
When you talk about technology being more relevant, what does that mean for you?
Yeah, I think examples we've done, if you look at what we've done internally at Logitech, as an example, I mentioned, how we've evolved into different product categories. So let's take video conferencing, video collaboration. It's now become, almost 10% of our business. It's something that was nowhere before, and is been growing at, year over year, over 50 to 60% growth rate in the last couple of years. That hasn't happened just by the sheer, let's say, implementation or deployment of compelling products, but also by the way we've actually brought these products to market, which required platforms and online capabilities that IT has delivered, as well as the way we've actually embedded that into our own four walls, and how have we made it part of how our employees become more productive. So I think those are all ways that you're actually then making real choices and real decisions and implementation of technology that impact directly the way Logitech grows as a business.
I know that being a change agent is very important to you. And so would you share some thoughts on that for us?
Yeah. I mean, I think being a change agent for a CIO, I think is a golden opportunity, because if I go back to Jeffrey Moore's discussion about Zone to Win, he talks about, as a company, you can innovate in multiple ways, right? And you always have the tension between kind of keeping and sustaining the stuff that's working well and trying to kind of break off and do something new. As an IT group, what you can do is actually impact multiple places in the business that help all in terms of innovation, right? And so it could be strengthening the performance of the business that we have today, creating environments that allow you to actually experiment and develop new products, or actually helping in terms of really developing and innovating new products, right? And to do all of these, really as an IT team, you have the opportunity to actually drive the change and be a leader of the change versus kind of being a recipient of some of these changes, right? And I think that for me, I'm passionate about it because if you are going to be passive about the change and more undergo it instead of actually taking the lead, then you really get cornered very quickly into a role that you maybe didn't pick, a lot of discussions about cost, and really are trying to fight for relevance versus actually demonstrating the importance of what IT can do.
To what extent is digital driving these kind of changes in IT that you've been describing?
Yeah, well, I think 100%, right? I mean, digital has created new markets, new products altogether, even new users and new consumers, so to speak, right? So we live in a completely different world than we were 10 or 15 years ago. And the pace at which these changes are happening is also increasing. So when you have that kind of environment as an IT group and as a CIO, you can't necessarily sit back and just see what happens or what the impact is to your business, right? And I think digital, as it exists overall in the world around us, has meant that as an organization we need to adapt and change, and has also meant that the IT function itself needs to quickly adapt and change. So it's I think inevitable, and I think it's, like I said, I think it's a positive because it's really elevated the role of IT overall.
You mentioned that IT has to adapt and change. This certainly implies talent, hiring, retention of talent. How do you think about that? How do you manage that shift?
Yeah, well, I think it's 100% something that you need to rethink in terms of how you run internally, right? And if I look at, for instance, Logitech, a few years ago, we were very back office centric, very heavy in terms of on-prem footprint of workloads that we used to run ourselves, and very actually heavily outsourced. Now, if you look now, a few years later, we're actually 70% or so of our workloads are in the cloud, so we're very cloud centric. The talent that we brought in is actually much more insourced, and we actually have much more control over, I guess, what I would call people are more versatile, right? That can actually take on different roles and also adapt to where the business is going very quickly. And overall, we've really transitioned into something that is a lot more dynamic and agile, right? And so I think it's something you do need to have a conscious and deliberate way of approaching differently. But something that's also inevitable, right? And if you don't do it, you quickly become very irrelevant.
How much change was required inside your IT organization to adopt these agile methods and just respond to the expectation of speed that users have towards you?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think some of that is natural change that, as an example, just if you look at the type of employees that come into the company, with millennials and people that are more used to a whole different kind of world in terms of technology, you actually get the benefit of some of the change just by virtue of the different generations that are coming in. For some of the people that have maybe been in the industry longer and have been used to the traditional kind of waterfall IT and what have you, I think you have to manage that consciously. Also, so some of the things we did in the past 12 to 18 months is focused agile training and understanding kind of just the agile methodology. We've changed the structure of our organization to flatten it and also create more dynamic, what we call squads, right? So teams that are assembled dynamically based on the business need of the project that we're running, but that can be quickly disbanded and reassembled into something different. But so those are things, so it's not something that happens overnight. I would definitely say it's a year or 2 years change for us. But it's also something that we've consciously been driving with different initiatives. Where I mentioned earlier, kind of the clock speed is now where we have NPIs, new product introductions and launches, maybe every 6-9 months, right? So where it used to be maybe a year or 2 year type of cycle, right? And as we actually expand more categories, more brands, more products that we actually play in, then that pace gets somewhat exponentially increased, right? And so now all of a sudden you have a new Bluetooth speaker coming out, you have a new gaming keyboard coming out, and all of that within maybe a few weeks time span of each other, right? And so that's just kind of what people see on the outside. But then on the inside, everybody needs to be able to support that and operate at an even faster pace to be able to do that. So, it's not all perfect, right? And a lot of things need to be improved, and we learn from them. But I think it's reflecting the fact that that's just the way we have to operate to be competitive.
What happens when you acquire companies? For example, you just acquired Blue Microphones, which,
Yes.
by the way, is another company whose products we recommend when we're doing our online shows.
Well, I appreciate it. We'll definitely make you a ambassador for Logitech, just because of what you've been doing. But 100%, M&As are something that's really important, right? Because it's something that realistically tries to leverage the fact that you have expertise, you have brands that are really strong, and that we can easily, let's say, integrate within our company. It's important that we're able to integrate them quickly. And it's a great example of a company that fits well into our portfolio. It supports our strategy in terms of having strong brands and being able to, again, go back to those digital experiences that we're trying to connect our consumers with. And so when we do these type of acquisitions for IT, it's another example of where we quickly need to understand how do we keep the things that are good about the company in terms of the brand, the products, the consumers, the success that they have in terms of the growth that we've been attracted to, while at the same time trying to find the efficiencies of the operations, right? And so that's a perfect example where I think by now, we did Astro Gaming acquisition last year. We've done a few before then, and now we've done Blue Microphones. I think it's become something that we're getting better at in terms of balancing the efficiency while maintaining the unique part of what we acquire, but also requires a pretty fast pace in terms of making that happen.
You mentioned earlier that some of your work is customer facing. Please tell us about that.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, and I think it's something that I expect more and more CIOs or IT teams to start evolving into, to taking on not just, let's say, the traditional technology aspect of IT, but also what is the maybe close business function that benefits most from some of this technology that you could actually help shape and help be successful and support the rest of the company strategy. So this year I've been asked to take on customer engagement, we call it, our customer experience, which is really all about how do we provide the services and the support that our consumers and our customers expect from us to be able to actually benefit from the products that they buy, right? And so I think the reason that's exciting for me is, number one, is you have to be very obsessed about expectations, right? If you're going to talk to customers, there's an expectation we set when we actually create brands, right? If you're a Blue Microphone customer, if you're a Logitech G gaming customer, you have a brand identity and expectation that needs to also be reflected in the way you experience us when you call and say, I got a problem with my gaming mouse or something, right? And so I think you need to be really obsessed about that expectation and matching it to the brand value. And then second, you really see the benefit, again, of technology and digital, right? There's such an opportunity. There's no function besides customer support that has as many touch points directly with customers as that function does, right? And so I think the opportunity there is to, how do you use digital to make these touch points really compelling, drive things like customer loyalty, and help, like I said, really reinforce the identity of the brand that people actually bought the product for. So I think that's what's exciting. I think that's also where there is this somewhat intersection between classic IT and digital platforms and more customer-facing type of functions.
Why does customer experience, customer engagement become an IT function as opposed to, say, live inside marketing?
Yeah. Well, I think you could argue either way, right? And I'm not, let's say, arguing that it has to be an IT function. In our case, it went that way, and I think partly because it does reflect the fact that as an IT team, we've demonstrated leadership in terms of let's actually talk more about business than just purely about technology, right? And so that's, I think, just purely how that's played out. In our case, you could definitely argue you could also go with marketing. Marketing these days in our CMO is a perfect example where we partner very closely because that's also so much more digital than it used to be. But I think the benefit of having IT and customer engagement together is not only these platforms and the rise of chatbots and AI you can apply in terms of the experience that you can provide, but also the fact that you can now benefit from similar, let's say, requirements around functions, right? How do you really deliver services in ways that are customer friendly? How do you measure and make sure you have discipline around performance management and delivering on customer expectations? So I think there's a lot of synergies there and benefits in terms of combining it. And like I said, I think for an IT team, it's also an exciting way to actually change the way we operate.
So it's really a matter of institutionalizing customer engagement and the right type of experience as opposed to just, well, we're all going to try really hard.
Yes. Yeah, I don't think that will cut it exactly, but for sure there's a lot of things you need to put in place to make that happen, right? And I'm under no illusion that at Logitech or some of the other brands that we have today, we're the best in class, right? And there's a lot of work still to be done. But also the consumer's expectations are changing, right? And that's partly why you also need to be really thinking about not just purely digital, but how are consumers and customers changing themselves, and what is their expectation in terms of the interactions that they have. I think a great example is we talked about gaming and eSports and how crazy it's growing. I think I read something that said it doubled in terms of video game software sales in the last 5 years. The likes of PlayStation subscriptions are over millions and millions of people. Esports gamers are now expected to be bigger celebrities than NBA players or something like that, right? So if you look at how that's evolved, it means that the people that actually are into those products are also, and we see that, expecting different interactions using platforms online like social, like Twitch and Steam, and looking at ways that they can copy configurations of gaming setups that others have with their products that they bought from Logitech. So there's a lot of let's say touch points and interactions that are completely changing in terms of the dynamics. And so if you have all that, and then let's say our customer engagement capability are still simply, give us a call and there'll be an agent that tries to walk you through 3 troubleshooting steps, it's not really matching and not as compelling as what you would expect in terms of that customer engagement. So we're looking at ways that, can you actually change the type of agents that you interact with, the conversations that you're having? Is it a chat online? Is it an in-app or what have you, right? So I think there's a lot of changes there as an example that we anticipate.
So the proliferation of technology that's affecting internal expectations of you, at the same time, you are changing your customers' expectations because your customers are becoming much more sophisticated.
Completely, yeah, and sophisticated, different, completely different dynamics and, different expectations. And I think what you can learn from that and apply it inside your 4 walls is that you need to not only be obsessed about those expectations, but also look at ways you can make experiences effortless, that you really focus on the, say, journey and the experiences that people undergo when they actually interact with Logitech, and really apply that internally as well in terms of people that work with us, right? And you work with or partner within the company. So yeah, I think there's benefits both ways, right? There's things you learn inside that you can apply outside and the other way around.
Massimo, you've mentioned relevancy several times. So is relevancy a function of all of these things, or is there some other dimension that drives relevancy of the CIO to the business?
Yeah, well, for sure, all these things. I think relevance has to start with leadership, right? And actually standing up and stepping up and trying to influence the conversation into something besides just purely cost or things like around operational efficiencies. But it's also, like I said, something that is mandatory in the environment that we're in, right? I think if you don't take up a role that's more than just purely, running the email and the Wi-Fi, then what happens is other companies, and especially if you take digital natives, right? Take Uber or take Facebook or Google. These companies apply technology second nature, right? It's like it's something that is assumed and it's everywhere and it's pervasive. And they have to, right? Because that's kind of what they've been born into, right? As a digital native. And so as these companies in their IT shops operate in a whole different way in terms of how they apply technology, if you don't do that, you're not only becoming, as the IT team and as a CIO, potentially irrelevant, but you're actually doing a big disservice to the company, right? You're actually allowing everybody else to run away with your lunch, right? And I think that's what the opportunity is for an IT team and a CIO, is to not just think about your own relevance, but how can you actually boost what the competitive, let's say, aspect is of your own company as well.
As we finish up, I'm sure that there will be CIOs listening to this saying, yeah, this sounds great, but how do I do it? How do I start?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know that I have the secret recipe, but I think there's a number of things that people can think about. And like I said, for me personally, I think there's never been a better time to be a CIO, right? I think if you start with that mindset and realize the fact that technology now plays such a prominent role that people actually will turn to you, and I don't think you necessarily need to make a lot of marketing effort to actually promote yourself, but people will turn to you more often to ask about how to make use of technology in a competitive way. I think that's the first step, right? Because then you can actually start observing and finding opportunities that you maybe didn't look for before. The second is, I think you need to also be clear for yourself what is the role that you're passionate about. Because some people, and I think some roles and in some companies that may still be valid, if the biggest value you bring is making sure the servers are up and email doesn't go down and people are able to get to the cloud or what have you, then and that's a valid role and that makes sense. I think if that's something you're passionate about, you should really focus on it. If you're going to try to become something you're not passionate about, you should definitely rethink that. And I think the third piece is really understanding what the strategy is of your business, right? And in our case, at Logitech, we're building more and more products that have cloud built into it, have computer vision, AI, machine learning, and all these different new technologies. And if that's what the business and the company is doing, you'd be a fool not to try to actually contribute to that when you are an IT expert, right? And so understanding what the business is trying to achieve and being able to figure out how you can contribute, I think, is the other piece.
Okay, Massimo, thank you so much. Again, thank you so much to IPsoft for underwriting this series. We are in their AI Experience Lab in New York City, and IPsoft is literally making CXOTalk possible. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube, tell all your friends, and I hope you have a great day. Bye-bye.